Hello and welcome to this workflow tutorial. My name is Chris and I'll be showing you how I went about making this Desert Eagle 50 caliber Action Express handgun. It was a very long and complicated process, and I want to share with you some of the things I learned along the way of making it as far as workflow and programs go. I used a variety of different software and I'm quite pleased with the final result, and I hope that you'll benefit from some of the mistakes that I made during the making of it. Now, it makes use of several different maps and is a moderate poly count. The wireframe looks like this. So maybe not quite next gen, but it serves its purpose, and I didn't go too over the top with the ridges on the side or some of the indentations, but it should be sufficient for the project that I'm working on. Now, there's quite a lot of details to cover, such as the printing on the side of the magazine and even on the bottom of the bullets and on the side of the weapon itself. You notice that I didn't detail on this side because it wouldn't be visible to the camera that I'm working with. And anyways, I will be going over how exactly I created it and the process and a few tips to get a more accurate result with the normal maps and things of that nature. So if give me a second, I'm going to switch over to Photoshop. Alright, so I'm going to explain to you my workflow in a more abstract manner just so you get your mind around it, and then we'll go into the specifics of each program and I'll show you how I do it exactly. And I recommend that you do this, just write out your battle plan, as it were, either on paper or in a Word document, and plan out things before you jump into a project, just so that you know exactly where you're going, you can keep yourself paced, and you can have like a checklist of things you want to do, and you're not just sitting there, it's like, oh, what do I want to model next, and stuff. That's something that I ran into this time around. I didn't have a checklist for what I wanted to model and how detailed I wanted it to become, so it took a little bit longer in the long run to complete. So the first part of my workflow is in Blender. It's one of my favorite tools for doing personal projects, just because it has some very fast poly modeling tools. Even though they aren't as extensive as some other programs, they do work really fast and they are centered around hotkeys, which I particularly like. So we're going to use this for the modeling of the high and low poly meshes. And then once we're done modeling the high and the low, we're going to do UV unwrapping on the low model, which Blender is, at least in my opinion, almost unparalleled as far as its ease and UV tools as compared to other programs. What we're also going to do is well, first we're going to put all of the UV chords on the same texture space, just so that can all fit on one texture. And then we're going to be hardening the normals using sharpen edge and edge split, which is a weakness in Blender. Other programs do a different kind of method for doing that, but it serves our purposes and it shouldn't be that big of a problem. So the next step is we're going to put the both models into XNormal, and we're going to bake as accurate a map as we can. And so what we're going to do is bake a AO map, ambient occlusion, which XNormal is very good at, as opposed to Blender, which they both have different algorithms for calculating it, but I prefer XNormal. We're also going to do normal maps. Well, actually just a normal map. We're going to do an object space, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But you can bake both of these in Blender if you want to. I'd recommend against it because Blender doesn't have very extensive tools in this area, and XNormal is completely free, so you can do whatever you want to with it. It's completely up to you. Then we're going to move into Handplane, which is a sort of new program. You may not have heard of it before. It is specifically for correcting normal maps. This is why I said object space here. Normally you'd bake out a tangent map for whatever game art you'd want, but in this case you want an object space. Now Handplane takes an FBX file and an object space normal map, and it spits out a tangent space normal map that is much more accurate, depending on two factors. Firstly, the program you baked it in, and secondly, the engine that you're wanting it to go into, whether that be Unity, UDK, or you can even bake it specifically for Source Engine or 3ds Max or Maya for real-time rendering. We're going to be doing a Unity specific map in this case, and we're going to get our tangent space from there. And once we have that map, we're going to go into Quixel NDO2. Now, this is specifically for adding in some details that would be pretty hard otherwise using floating geometry, but I'm going to demonstrate how to use that technique in Blender as well. Also, what you can do is add a supplementary AO map, specifically from the tangent space normals or the object space normals. Actually, no, just the tangent space. And then we're going to overlay that on the baked AO, and then overlay that onto the diffuse map once we get to that part. Now, once we have the AO, normal, and other maps, we're going to go into Quixel NDO Quixel DDO, which is a specific tool or plugin for Photoshop. Both of these are plugins for Photoshop, by the way. And they aren't free. This is free for personal use, but these help create some more grit to the textures and give a lot of real kind of effects to the details and things of that nature. But Quixel DDO2, or actually it's DDO5 now, I think, actually takes all of your maps and then takes data from them and creates some very awesome grid to them, and wear and tear, and just a lot of realism. This isn't especially necessary. You can paint the textures on your own, but it would take 10 times as long to do so. Now, the maps that we're going to get from these are a better AO map, a diffuse map, and a detailed normal, a specular, a gloss, and I'm actually going to bake I'm going to paint a custom transparency map or alpha map outside of these programs, and that's specifically for the magazine holes where it shows where the level of ammo you have. Since we have all of those maps, we can easily move into Marmoset or Unity to display our models, and I'll show you how to do that as well. But I guess that's about it for this workflow overview video. I'm going to move into Blender and show you how I built the high poly map, how I made the high poly model and how I modeled the low poly and all the UV unwrapping and normals and all that stuff. Just give me a second, I'll switch over to there. So I like to start off with the hardest part first, so I did the slide, which was the most complicated piece of the entire mesh, and then I did the barrel, the lower receiver, the ridges on the side there, the front iron sights, the hammer, the back iron sight, the safety, the slide release, the trigger, the lower rail, the laser and the laser emitter, the mag release and whatever the other one is, the grip, and the magazine. It's important whenever you're making the high resolution model to keep your surfaces clean and flat and your edges somewhat soft, especially for a game model. This way it bakes a little bit better. You notice that I had some extremely tight edges down here, and that actually came back to bite me whenever I tried to bake this, because I didn't have enough resolution in both the geometry and the map itself to capture some of these edges. Also make sure that you make these kind of modular, I guess, just so that this will make it so that it'll be easier to bake it later on whenever you're modeling the low poly. Also make sure that all, and this is just a general rule of thumb whenever you're making game assets, to have all of the origins at 0, so that whenever you have to move around a mesh or something, you can just hit Alt-G and bring it back to where it was originally. And this makes exporting a lot easier and removes some of the ambiguity between programs. Also make sure that the scale is 0, or no, scale is 1, and then the location is 0, and the rotation. And if it isn't, then just hit apply and then do location, rotation, scale, or any combination of those. But so with that in mind, we can move on to, well, I can show you some of the topology that I have here. You'll notice that I try to keep things pretty generally safe as far as keeping it quads and everything like that, just so that you don't get any artifacts while baking. Just keep in mind that you can use n-gons on flat surfaces without much of a problem, as long as you have border edges around the area where you're using them. Like in this case, there's one right here, but I do have verts bordering it. This makes it so that you don't get any subsurf errors. But with that, we can move along to the low poly next. And one additional thing, you'll notice that on the second layer I have a few objects here. From a distance, you'll notice what they resemble. They're there for the indentations in the mesh. This is what I meant by floating geometry. Basically, in order to make these little divots, you just make a cube, delete the top, invert the normals inside so that they're pointing inwards so that it'll actually bake normally, then add a subsurf modifier, and by placing these on top of certain surfaces you can actually create indentations. This is a little bit easier to do within NDO because you don't have to create any geometry, you can just do it within Photoshop. But if you don't have NDO, then this is the way you're going to have to do it, more than likely. Just make sure to export these with the high poly once you're done. And yeah, that's about it. Now for modeling the low poly, you're going to want to keep a few different rules in mind as opposed to modeling regular hard surface stuff. Firstly, geometry doesn't really matter as long as, well, topology, I should say, as long as the poly count is a reasonable amount and you maintain the general silhouette of the model. And to preview that, you can just hit Alt-Z as long as there aren't any lights on the in the scene. And another thing you'll see here is that I have some blue lines. You might not have recognized these, and you probably shouldn't if you haven't touched any game art yet. But what these do is they are called edge splits, and that's what this modifier does. And normally you wouldn't use this in any case during a normal render or an illustration in 3D, because they give you extremely hard edges that are unrealistic. But in a game art, you can use these as a sort of a shortcut. Instead of having more geometry, you can have less. What they do is they basically what it's doing is it's ripping the face itself away from the mesh. Now what this does is it actually doubles the vert count in a sense, because there's two verts on the same place, but it offers a harder edge, because normally what this looks like is, if I can, yeah, this is what it looks like without any edge splits. This is what it looks like with edge splits. It does look a lot better, and it's going to provide a much better bake, because the normal map engine doesn't have to interpolate between two faces. If you have a 90-degree edge, like in this case, it's going to try and interpolate between these two, and it's not going to result in a very good or accurate normal map, because it's going to try to stretch the normals along this edge, and it's not going to look very pretty. But with this, it's just going to recognize this is a flat face and this is a flat face, and it's not going to try and smooth between the two. You can look up a lot of different stuff about hardened normals and things on the polycount forums, and that's where I recommend you find a lot of this stuff. But once you have that, a good rule of thumb is whenever you create a hardened normal like this, you also have a UV seam there, as you can see. And most of my UV seams are just along the hardened edges, and that gives me a good map to work with limited stretching and such. But if you should need a UV seam anywhere else, you don't have to have a hardened edge there. So in order to do this, just select the edges you want to harden, hit Control E, mark sharp, then Control E again, and mark seam. That will mark both parts, and then you can unwrap it. In order to unwrap, well, generally what I do is I create a mesh for each part of the high resolution model. Then what this allows me to do is just isolate both of them and work on them at separately from the rest of the mesh, so I don't have any clutter and I don't have to use wireframe mode all the time. But once you have your low resolution mesh, you're going to want to open up a UV image editor and do a test unwrap, just to make sure that it unwraps smoothly and there's no parts that you didn't mark as sharp or mark as having a seam. And one thing that is nice about Blender is that it has this margin right here, which allows you to break up some of this claustrophobia right there. You don't want them to be this close, because if you have a smaller, if you downsize the map, you might get some overlap, and that won't look very pretty in the high resolution, or in the low resolution version of the map. Which is, you can look up mid maps to find out more about that. This is why you want a margin and edge padding whenever you bake a normal map. So once we have the low poly, then we can go into baking. And before we go into baking, you're going to want to combine all of these meshes by hitting A, then Control J. That's going to give you all of this mess right here. But you can just hit unwrap and maybe decrease the margin a little bit. Bump it up to around maybe 0.2. Just keep in mind that if you increase the margin too much, it'll get too small and you won't be able to bake it at all. But once you have, you can rearrange this to your liking, depending on if you're going to paint it or whatever. But once you have this, then you're going to want to separate out these meshes again. That might seem a little bit tedious, but one way you can do it is hit P and then hit select by loose parts. What that's going to do is it's going to divide it up according to anything that's not connected to each other, which in some cases you might not want. Like I want this to be one piece, so just hit those two and then hit Control J. And once you have all these meshes, oh, and this one as well, Control J. Once you have all these meshes, you're going to want to do what I call exploding the mesh. And what that is you select both the high resolution and the low resolution, drag it away from the main part, and give it its own space. This way you don't get any overlapping geometry, which can result in some really nasty artifacts in your normal map, or in any map. So you just want to turn on both layers, select all the parts that you want to have baked together, make sure they're still in the same place, and then do all that. So once you have it exploded like this, then this is where you export it to XNormal. But whenever you're baking the AO map, you want them to be all together. So you can do that sort of thing again, and you can hit Alt-G and then relocate all the meshes back together, which is why I wanted all the origins in the center in the first place. So you can just do that, and then hit Control-J again to bring it all into one mesh once again. That's how you manipulate the low poly mesh. Hopefully that was good. And in case I didn't emphasize this before, if you have a very sharp angle like this, that's where you want the edge split to be. You notice that I did it right here, but that's simply because I wanted this piece to be on its own, so I can add some text on it without any stretching. So anywhere that's sort of a 90-degree angle or even sharper, then you want to add a edge split. And then around circular pieces like this, you're going to want to add a seam somewhere just so that it doesn't get stretched or becomes a ring and it might not bake properly. As you can see on any circular piece here, I have a seam down a part that doesn't show itself to the camera, so that won't be noticeable. But that's how you prepare the low resolution model, and that's almost all that we have to do in Blender, and then we can move on to the texturing bit, which I'll get to in the next part.